Hello and welcome to the program. This week, we're still keeping our eyes on the growing tension between Russia and Ukraine, as the US still believes that Russia is planning an attack on the country. Last week, EU and African leaders held a 6th summit in Brussels. Over 40 African leaders attended the meetings, including Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari. We'll be discussing later with Foreign Affairs commentator Nweke on the gains of the summit and delve a little into the crisis in Europe. That's diplomatic challenge and a wrap. But first, a quick check on other discussions in diplomatic circles, and we'll be right back. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Welcome again.
I'm here.
Queen Elizabeth has tested positive for COVID-19 and is said to be experiencing mild cold-like symptoms. The 95-year-old monarch had been in contact with her eldest son and heir Prince Charles, who tested positive last week. It is understood that a number of people have tested positive at Windsor Castle, where the Queen resides. A statement from Buckingham Palace says that she will continue to receive medical attention and will follow all the appropriate guidelines. Israel's Defense Minister Benny Gantz has refused to vocally support a two-state solution for Israel and the Palestinians, referring instead to his preference for a two-entity solution. Gantz, who at the beginning of February visited Bahrain to sign a security cooperation amid heightened tensions in the Gulf, said Israel wanted to extend the hand of peace to new leaders in the region. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has accused China of an act of intimidation after a Chinese Navy vessel directed a laser at an Australian military surveillance aircraft last week. A P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft was illuminated on Thursday while flying over Australia's northern approaches by a laser from a People's Liberation Army Navy vessel, potentially endangering lives. Mr. Morrison says his government will demand answers from Beijing. The Kenyan High Commissioner to Nigeria, Ambassador Wilfred Machage, has died. This was announced in a statement by the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Machage reportedly collapsed at home and was pronounced dead at a hospital shortly after 12:30 p.m. in Abuja. His wife was with him at the time of the incident. Ambassador Machage was appointed High Commissioner to Nigeria and 12 other countries in Central and Western Africa by President Uhuru Kenyatta in January 2019.
President Muhammadu Buhari is back in the country after attending a 2-day summit with fellow African leaders and partners in Europe. The summit held in what some analysts say was an effort by Europe to reassert its influence on a continent where China and Russia have made hefty investments.
Brussels, Belgium played host to the 6th European Union-African Union Summit on the 17th and 18th of February. Several EU and AU leaders gathered to discuss issues ranging from the pandemic to security, especially in the Sahel, the recent coups on the continent, and also huge investments for the African continent. President Muhammadu Buhari on the first day called on European leaders as partners in promoting democracy and good governance to lend their weight behind measures put in place by the African Union to stem the tide of unconstitutional leadership changes rearing its head again on the continent. In his contribution to the roundtable discussion on peace, security and governance, President Buhari equally stressed the need to nip the root causes of extremism, conflicts and tensions in Africa at inception. Aside that, President Buhari met with several other leaders, including President of Guinea-Bissau Umaru Embalo and Prime Minister of Ethiopia Abiy Ahmed. African leaders appreciated the EU's pledge of 150 billion euros for investment in Africa's infrastructure, an initiative many see as a counter-action to China's heavy investment on the continent. However, Africa welcomes it.
Nous avons surtout salué l'initiative européenne pour le financement des infrastructures.
We especially welcome the European initiative regarding the financing of infrastructure. This represents for Africa an amount of 150 billion euros if it's effectively mobilized. I think this will be a considerable step forward and a bridge between our continents.
We have together developed very clear objectives we want to invest in. There is the big topic of the green transition, of course the renewables. I had several talks with partners who immediately want to engage on the main topic of green hydrogen. There is transport networks. The connectivity within the continent is crucial for the free trade area to function. Digital connections, the satellite idea has been mentioned, but also sustainable agriculture, healthcare, and most importantly, education.
To facilitate the COVID-19 global response, the World Health Organization announced 6 African countries to receive mRNA vaccine technology in WHO's project.
Today, I'm delighted to announce the first 6 African countries that will receive technology from the hub to produce their own mRNA vaccines: Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. WHO will work with the companies and the government in each country to develop a roadmap for training and production based on their needs and capacities.
This is the technology needed to produce mRNA vaccines. The Technology Transfer Project, launched last year, aims to help low and middle-income countries manufacture mRNA vaccines at scale and according to international standards. With regards to security, French President Emmanuel Macron hosted a meeting with African and Western leaders in Paris the day before to begin fleshing out plans on how to continue fighting Islamist militants in the Sahel region once France and its European partners pulled out of Mali. Sahel security was a front-burner issue, and at this summit, France announced withdrawing its troops from Mali. The French and allies decided to remove all boots on ground in Mali after fighting insurgency there for almost a decade. The announcement on the withdrawal of French troops and European Takuba special forces from Mali was made ahead of the summit in Brussels. The decision follows a deterioration in French relations with Mali. Overall, in conclusion of the meeting on the 18th of February, both parties issued a joint version for 2030. This is expected to consolidate a renewed partnership between the two continents.
Let's bring in foreign affairs commentator Colin Nweke. He is in Brussels, where the EU-AU summit has been holding over the past few days. Mr. Nweke, thank you for joining me on Diplomatic Channel.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Amarachi. Thank you for having me.
This is the 6th edition of the summit. What sort of progress do you think leaders have made so far?
Well, compared to the 5th session that took place in Ivory Coast, there has been, to a very large extent, some recognition, at least from the words of major European Union leaders, among others, Emmanuel Macron, that the relationship between Africa and Europe is actually a tired relationship, and I'm using his words. And so you could see some very, clear sense of camaraderie, whereby it just looks like at this moment the embassies of the different African countries, appears to now be set to carry out some follow-up, very important follow-up assignments in terms of the things that have been agreed and their roles in actually jigging their partners up here, follow up actively and make sure that, they are implemented. Now, along that line, I would say that they started off in the run-up to the session with an abstract objective of, rebuilding the relationship. In the meeting, they were able to give shape to that and then came up with what they now call 2 unions and a joint vision. Now, that joint vision is where the entire story rests. That vision of equal partners as opposed to the, construction, the dynamic of donor-recipient relations, that partnership where the colonial masters, as they used to be in the 60s, now we are in 2022, where they usually have to say, we're going to do this for you on ABC conditions. Take, for example, the issue of migration. Could you imagine the Europeans actually telling African leaders that if they refuse to accept migrants deported from Europe to Africa, that they are going to sanction them and so on and so forth. So that diplomacy of paternalism and, nanny diplomacy looks like going forward, it is going to stop. There is going to be true partnership because it is on the basis of that true partnership that then they can begin to, do something meaningful. But on the part of the African leaders themselves, because it is not up to Europe alone to place Africa in a strong negotiating position. Africa has got to understand that they have something to bring to the table because it is not a coincidence that, Africa has become that bride that everybody is running after. China, on the one hand, is there. Turkey has been making a very significant inroad in Africa. Russia, amidst its problem, is actually getting set to host Africa at the end of this year. Japan is, continuing its overture. So everybody is running to Africa, and it is not because they want to help Africa. It is because, there are interesting things happening in Africa. So Africa, through their leaders, have now got to understand that, yes, it is for a reason that the rest of the world consider them a beautiful bride, and that is why they are running after them. And so through that, they would have to, kind of strengthen their negotiating power and actually dare to make some demands from time to time.
So President Buhari addressed, this summit, and he mentioned a few things. One about the coups in Africa, of course, which have become more rampant in the past 1 year. And then he also mentioned terrorism and extremism and the areas he identified for quick, substantive results and, European help and so on. So first off, why do you think it's so hard for leaders to actually bring, these erring countries to order, to impose hard-hitting measures on countries where coups have occurred? And then, with the issue of funding and logistics and so on, the European Union already gives to Africa, what else can they do to help curb the problem on the continent?
Well, first and foremost, as long as poverty is rife in Africa, there isn't very much that is happening that will, see significant success. So I think everything that is happening has got to start with, radical steps to eradicate poverty. That's number one. Number two, it depends on who you ask about why some of these interventions haven't quite yielded the right results. Now, Africans, for example, not being able to take, cohesive steps to, stop coup attempts and, forceful takeover of power. You are dealing with a, set of tired old men who are in actually a club of themselves where they see it as an imperative to protect one another. I mean, irrespective of the public statements they make and all of that, they are actually there to protect one another because, one way or the other, they are all doing one unholy thing or the other. So that is that hesitance. And so sincerity of purpose is lacking. And then coming to the side of Africa, Europe, you've got to realize this, Amarachi. It is a lucrative business out here in Europe to sell arms to Africa. And if there is no conflict, they have no arms to sell.
Mr. Nweke, Europe is dealing with its own crisis, and that's the tension between Ukraine and Russia. The US and UK still believe that an attack is imminent on Ukraine. There's an invasion still planned by Russia, and the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says Russia's planning what will be the biggest war in Europe since 1945. Your thoughts on this?
Well, misinformation, disinformation is a very well-known tool of war. Both Putin, Russia, and major leaders of the transatlantic alliance, the United States, Germany less, but certainly the UK, are also using those tools of misinformation. Take, for example, the number of troops that are positioned in, Belarus and other regions or in the border with Ukraine. Nobody is certain. At some point, they will tell you it's 100,000. Other points, they will say 130. And at this moment, they are telling us it's nearly 170,000 troops. And then Russia telling the world that it's withdrawing, yet it is, supportive of, a secessionist group that it is sympathetic to and, that support one another, bombing a kindergarten where kids are in school playing. So these are all, misinformation and part of that goal. And I hope that at some point, and maybe that point is actually now, that both sides have got to realize that nobody is getting out of this unhurt. Now, they have talked about the sanctions that is going to hurt Russia so very much, and Russia is going to unleash mayhem, which Boris Johnson has said is going to be worse than the Second World War. But then there need to be a give and take. For example, and I'm going to keep it at just one example, the demand or the concern about Ukraine joining NATO is something that Russia has up on the agenda as its demand, towards NATO. Well, for Christ's sake, what is so difficult in at least assuring or reassuring Russia that is not going to happen, at least in the foreseeable future? Because even Ukraine has clearly said that, yes, it is an ambition that they have, but it is not one that is immediate. So give him that assurance, even when you don't rule it out. So those are the kind of things that I believe that concessions that need to be made to be able to move this needle one step forward. And I hope this is the time to now begin to do that.
Mr. Collins Nweke, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining me on Diplomatic Channel.
Always my pleasure, Marachi. Thank you for having me.
To the crisis in the Baltic, as British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says, signs are that a plan has already, in some sense, begun for Russia to invade Ukraine. Over the weekend, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris was in Germany to discuss the situation. But on Saturday, President Vladimir Putin observed exercises by Russia's strategic nuclear missile forces. Leaders say a Russian invasion of Ukraine is imminent.
3, 2, 1, пуск!
The Kremlin said Russia had successfully test-launched hypersonic and cruise missiles at land-based targets during its military exercises. President Vladimir Putin observed the exercises on scenes with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko from what the Kremlin called a situation center. The drills follow maneuvers by Russia's armed forces in the past 4 months that have included a buildup of troops estimated by the West to number 150,000 or more to the north, east and south of Ukraine. With Western nations fearing what could be one of the worst conflicts since the Cold War, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said Russian forces were beginning to uncoil and move closer to the border with its former Soviet neighbor. Russia ordered the military buildup while demanding that NATO prevent Ukraine ever joining the alliance, but says Western predictions it is planning to invade Ukraine are wrong and dangerous. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Saturday that if Western leaders fail to fulfill their promises to support Ukraine's independence, it will have damaging consequences worldwide. He later said Russia was planning what could be the biggest war in Europe since 1945 and that sanctions on Russia in the event of an invasion would go much farther than previously suggested in public, and that the United States and Britain would seek to cut off Russian companies' access to US dollars and British pounds if the Kremlin orders an invasion.
As I speak to you today, we do not fully know what President Putin intends, but the omens are grim, and that is why we must stand strong. Let me be clear about the risk. The risk now is that people would draw the conclusion that aggression pays and that might is right. And if Russia invades its neighbor, we will sanction Russian individuals and companies of strategic importance to the Russian state. And we will make it impossible for them to raise finance on the London capital markets. And we will open up the matryoshka dolls of Russian-owned companies and Russian-owned entities to find the ultimate beneficiaries within. And if President Putin believes that by these actions he can drive NATO back or intimidate NATO, he will find that the opposite is the case.
US Vice President Kamala Harris was in Germany over the weekend. Speaking to reporters after attending a security meeting in Munich on Sunday, she said the United States will reevaluate its promised aid for Ukraine in the coming days. The United States has already made $1 billion in loan guarantees available and provided $650 million in defense equipment and services to Ukraine in the past year.
So far we have offered, and not even offered, we have transferred and given $650 million in aid. We have also made certain loan guarantees, around in particular $1 billion. And that is on top of all of the work that we have done collectively through the NATO alliance to provide support for Ukraine.
On Saturday, video was released showing Ukrainian officials, soldiers and foreign journalists running away from what appeared to be shelling as they visited the conflict zone in eastern Ukraine on Saturday. Faction leader of the ruling Servant of the People Party, David Arakamia, said in a video that the group drove to an observational outpost in the Donetsk region and took shelter when it came under fire by 120mm caliber ammunition. The group had to be evacuated to a shelter. In the meantime, Belarus Defense Ministry released a video on Sunday of the Defense Minister Viktor Krenin saying Russia and Belarus will extend joint military exercises that had been due to end on Sunday, dashing Western hopes that Russia would swiftly withdraw forces that could be used in a potential invasion of Ukraine. The decision to extend was taken because of increased military activity near the borders of Russia and Belarus and an escalation of the situation in the eastern Ukrainian region of Donbass.
This is where we end the program this week. I want to thank you for staying with us. Remember, you can catch this episode and others on youtube.com/channelsweb. Just go to the playlist and search for Diplomatic Channel. Or go to the website, look under programs for Diplomatic Channel. Diplomatic Channel airs Mondays at 8:30 p.m. on Sky 518 and 11:30 p.m. on DSTV 420 on Mondays. You can catch the other viewing days on our website, channelstv.com. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.